Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City vocalist, trumpeter, and composer Sarah Wilson. We caught up with her to talk about her new 2021 CD Kaleidoscope and her life and music. While deeply shaped by jazz, her music stylistically owes a lot to avant pop, Afro-Latin grooves, and indie rock, along with the post-bop continuum. Her artistic work reflects a dynamic interplay of theater, jazz, dance, and film, which frame her very unique and fresh compositional style. She's got a wonderful story. Enjoy.
Good. Hey, thanks for taking a minute out for the show.
Absolutely.
So Kaleidoscope comes out during a very strange time. We're at the end of a pandemic. Things have been obviously kind of out of control over the last year. So talk to me a little bit about what it means to have new music come out. I mean, one of the very few ways that you can directly communicate with an audience and your fan base.
Yeah, it's really exciting for me because this music was actually recorded in 2012, and it's taken me a very long time to be able to raise the funds to do the post-production and put it out into the world. And it's just miraculous that I was able to do this at this time when I think people are really yearning to hear music and to get a sense that music isn't dead, that musicians, we were hit so hard by COVID. I mean, of course, so many people have as well, but it really knocked out our industry. So I think it's symbolic and exciting that we're still here and we're still making music.
And you have a stellar lineup around you. I mean, you have Matt Wilson and Myra Melford. I mean, you have so many people on this album. Talk to me a little bit about the interplay between musicians and what it meant to have this cast around you.
Well, I've played with all of these musicians a lot over the years, and the group, without Myra, we played at Monterey Jazz Festival and did a little tour around that. And Matt said, we've got to bring Myra back into this. We've got to make a record. And so it all happened, and it's kind of a dream band for me. I envisioned working with a larger ensemble, and it's just, I think the way that people interplay together is just incredible, and they're all such masters and so respectful of my music and really get where it's coming from. So it's just exciting to have these phenomenal players who want to play with me.
What do you hope those that download or buy this album get from this artistic expression that you put out?
Honestly, I really hope that they feel some hope and feel soothed, and that they can just have a moment to just escape from everything we've gone through and just have a really nice moment. I came back to listening to it because I needed to make sure the master was okay, and I hadn't heard it in a really long time, years. And I just lied on my couch and I just smiled. It just made me really happy. So I hope it makes people feel peace and happiness.
So talk to me about how you got the bug for jazz. How did all of this start for you? Like, where were you born and raised, and kind of how it all began?
Yeah, so I was born in Healdsburg, California, which is about an hour north of San Francisco. My dad was a huge jazz fan, so I loosely grew up listening to it. My high school didn't have a jazz program, so I wasn't really exposed to it. And then I graduated from UC Berkeley in California and had been involved in puppet theater and went to the East Coast to work with Bread and Puppet Theater based out of Glover, Vermont. And there was a player, Dave Douglas, was there because his wife at the time was a puppeteer. And my first day working with the theater, we did a parade on the 4th of July in a little town of Vermont, and we're playing this, New Orleans jazz and had on costumes, and we're dancing around, and I was like, wow, this is really fun. And then I just increasingly became more and more involved in music with the theater and moved to New York in 1993, and that's when really I started studying with John McNeil and Laurie Frink and, these excellent jazz trumpet teachers and trumpet methodology, and I got the bug then in New York City.
What was the first live jazz show you saw that made you think, man, that would be something I would love to do?
Oh, wow. I think I probably was hearing Dave's groups at that time. He had a larger ensemble with Mike Serene and Mark Dresser and Eric Friedlander and Chris Bead at the time, and I was hearing that group a lot. And I was just sucking up. At that time in New York, you could just walk anywhere, any cafe. I was living in the East Village or on the Lower East Side, and you could just hear it. The Knitting Factory was going on Houston when I first moved there, and the Village Vanguard, the 55 Bar, Smalls. There were just all these phenomenal clubs there, so I was just soaking it in.
What was it like to get to New York? I mean, obviously everybody that's a jazz musician has dreams of getting there, but what was the beginnings like? What was the first big club you played in like?
So it was interesting because most players move to New York when they're already well established, or kind of have mastered their horn. And I did the opposite, where I moved there and I was studying there and learning there. So I was just developing my chops, but I got really lucky because in 1995, former bread and puppet colleagues of mine asked me to write music for a giant puppet show they were doing at Lincoln Center for the Arts at the Out of Doors Festival, and said, "Hey, do you want to write some music?" And I said, "Sure," even though I'd never written music in my life. So my first really big gig was at Lincoln Center, and that's when I hired this drummer, Kenny Wallison, and then the next year I hired musicians like Kenny Wallison. So Lincoln Center, I kind of got right to the top. Yeah,
beautiful.
Yeah.
So what albums were you listening to, growing up, jazz albums that really, really kind of got you interested?
So really growing up, I was listening to pop and rock. And then it was when I moved to New York in 1993, I was listening to a lot of Dave Holland in the 70s, a lot of Steve Coleman. I was listening to a lot of Afro-Cuban bands like Los Van Van. And that influenced my composing a lot. I would write these funky bass lines. And then just in terms of overall jazz, I was listening to Miles, I was listening to Eric Dolphy, I was listening to Duke Ellington, just really the entire repertoire of Clifford Brown. I was listening to all these, just getting a foundation in, these iconic classic jazz records. But also then I was hearing a lot of the downtown New York scene and was really influenced by, of course, Myron Melford and Henry Threadgill. So I was hearing more creative, original works at the same time that I was listening to the, traditional jazz.
You've played with heavy people throughout your career. What have you learned from, veterans and legends and luminaries that, in turn, you've taught younger players that you get around?
Well, it's interesting. I'm not a teacher, so but I am working on a project right now with formerly homeless youth in San Francisco out of an organization called Larkin Street Youth Services. They're singers, and they've written text, and I'm doing a whole music production with them. And with them, I'm just trying to get them to be really inspired and expose them to kind of a professional scene and really give them lots of support. And that's what I got from the people that I surrounded myself with in New York, was they were super supportive of me. So when I do have contact with young people, I want to just, give them a sense of believing in themselves.
Speaking of COVID, how did you survive this last year? What did you maybe do that will make you emerge stronger once you get back on stage and things start kind of kicking back into high gear?
So I was really, most of the time, predominantly focused on trying to survive economically. I could have faced total financial annihilation. I had to move. I couldn't afford my rent anymore. And I moved in with my partner, Marcus, and I started taking advantage of any artist relief grant I could find. Those were the first to come up. The Bay Area is really phenomenal with foundations and nonprofit organizations who are trying to support artists here. So I got tuned into that and was applying for everything. And then pandemic unemployment insurance came around, and it opened up to self-employed workers, which musicians are. And that was a miracle. And I've been completely saved by the Small Business Administration. I got a PPP loan. So that is, I'm hiring people. the CD came out of that. So without private foundations and government support, I really probably would not be talking to you today. I would not have been able to deal with music. Instead, I'm supported. My music is happening. I've got a gig at the Freight and Salvage in Berkeley on August 29th, a gig at SF Jazz on Friday, March 11th, and playing with the Festival of New Trumpet Music in September. So things are going really well, but it's so critical that artists get support. And for those that could take advantage of those funding sources, I was really tuned into that so I could. And so I'm really grateful for that.
What do you hope everyone realizes collectively about the power of live music when we do return, both audience and musician?
I hope people realize how important it is and all the steps to make it happen and to really try to support it, because it's been such a gap not to hear that. I've had the most seminal, inspirational moments hearing live music. And so I guess not having had it for so long, to just go out and support, go to shows, support live music wherever it can happen, to keep that going and alive in our country.
Why do you love jazz?
Because I feel like it's a place where I can, and this is tricky because I do a complicated thing. I sing this kind of singer-songwriter music. My music isn't straight ahead, but it's a place where I can be who I want to be. And I think that's really important. And it allows having improvisation allows for this unexpected thing to happen if you were just dealing strictly with notated music. Instead, there are these surprises, and a composition doesn't ever sound the same anytime it's played. And I love that spontaneity and creativity that comes from that.
Speaking of, every day you get to wake up, you get to create, you're a professional musician. What's the best part of being a professional musician for you?
I think it's the community, and it's been wonderful to reconnect with people. And when I reached out to all the musicians to do a CD release tour, I heard from people in 5 minutes to 2 hours, which, let me tell you, is usually not the case. It usually takes a lot longer. So to be able to reconnect them and to feel, their love and desire to play again. So it's a community of music. I think that's one of the most important things. And then for me also, it's such a euphoric experience when I'm composing music and when I'm performing. And so I'm just drawn to that as well. Everything else goes away and I'm just completely immersed in the music.
If a jazz DeLorean pulls up in front of your house after we get off the phone and you can punch in the digits and go where in the history and the annals of jazz, where are you going? Who are you going to see?
Wow. I think I'd want to hear a Miles quintet with Wayne Shorter. I think I'd want to go back to all those records and hear that phenomenal music, and then also hear a lot of Wayne Shorter records from that time as well. So, Wayne's Blue Note records and Miles, I can't remember I have the CD collection of it, but that quintet, I would love to hear that group live. That would be amazing.
As the world emerges and artists and jazz musicians get back out there, how do you see the world of the community of jazz, the jazz community coming back stronger than they were before this happened?
Well, hopefully the venues are going to be able to get their feet back on the ground. I think that they are, but it's also important that small clubs, and I know that federal SBAs have this shuttered operating venue grant program, and hopefully that can really get off the ground, because I don't really know I'm going to New York in September, and I don't really know what clubs are going to still be around and what's going on. So, and it just requires venues and hiring musicians and foundations paying attention to the needs that we have at this time as well.
What advice would you give young musicians now that we're getting ready to enter this world of jazz, pandemic happened and everything reopens? What words of wisdom would you give for what you've lived as a musician and to keep going forward?
I would say that it's a hard time, right? It's a really different time than when I was living in New York and I could afford to live there for under $400 a month. I mean, it was amazing how I managed to eke out a life. I would say that young musicians now just keep playing and let the love of your music and the love of your instrument carry you through, and you're going to find a way to play. And for a long time, I had a day job part-time, and that paid my bills. And so there's a way, if you just have faith and you keep at it, There's ways that you can still play music and do another job, or, you just have to be creative and pivot. But if you just follow that love and just keep doing it.
So everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
I'm just doing my own thing. I'm just trying to follow my joy and bliss and be as strategic and creative as I can about how to continue to make that happen in my life. And it's a total blessing that I am doing music full time, and I just love it. So I think I'm strategic and creative. Kind of. Jerome
Beautiful.
Harris, the bass player, once he said, "Sarah, you're a cultural entrepreneur," and I think that kind of wraps it up.
Nice. That's wonderful. Sarah, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. Good luck with the album and the return to the stage.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate you bringing me on Neon Jazz.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Sarah for her time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Davino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.